So for this lecture, we're going to talk about prions, which are referred to as infectious proteins. Now, prion diseases that are pretty famous are going to be our mad cow disease, for example. But in cattle, it's a bovine spongiform encephalopathy, which became contaminating in hamburger meat, and in humans who ate the hamburger meat got this prion disease as well, which was referred to as mad cow disease. Now, the prion disease actually comes from scabies in sheep. And so you have the prion protein, SC, which that comes from our scrapie. So that is the disease form of the protein. Prion diseases are always going to be fatal, and it can take time to kill an individual or an animal. It can take months. Transmission is going to be of these infectious proteins, and they're referred to as infectious proteins because they cause ultimately misfolding of your own proteins. Now, the prion disease is a protein, so there is no nucleic acid. So this is not an RNA DNA thing. This is simply just your amino acids. You're linked together to form your protein. Prion proteins are very, very, very hardy. They're very resistant to inactivation. So UV radiation, just our normal alcohol, boiling, etc., does not harm prion proteins. They really have to be inactivated by a steam autoclave, and it has to be very high heat and also, of course, with pressure. Now, prion proteins are going to, as I said before, change your other proteins into the disease protein. And when someone is infected with prion proteins, if you look in their brain post-mortem, you'll see high levels of prion protein present. And there is no initiation of an inflammatory response because we have prion proteins. They are normal, they're in our central nervous system, and they are part of our neural signaling pathways. So what's known about the pathogenesis is not a lot. It is just known that if you do get a prion protein, that it will convert your normal proteins to the disease state, and over time this would lead to damage to your central nervous system. So ultimately you have a loss of neurons. You have your proliferation of your immune cells inside of your brain. It's called spongiform because there are holes or vacuoles in the brain cortex and cerebellum at postmortem. The incubation period, again, can be very prolonged. So you present with a neurologic disease, the individual passes away, and then upon doing the post-mortem analysis, you find the brain has these holes in it, these vacuoles in it. And the contamination could have been years before you actually presented with the disease. And then, of course, this is always going to be fatal. Now, this is the prion protein. We have the normal prion protein that is going to be part, again, of our synapse, and is thought to be important in turning off synapses in the brain. The prion scabies, or SC, is shown here, and so with the normal prion, you have quite a bit of alpha helixes, and in the prion scabies, these are converted to beta sheets. And so this is a conformational change, and so this is going to cause the protein to not be able to function properly. And over time, this loss of function leads to actual vacuums in your brain of where cells should actually be. So here's the pathology. You can see the vacuoles. So all of these empty spaces are the vacuoles, and a normal brain, of course, would be intact. And so again, the loss of the function of this protein is going to erode basically your brain matter. Now, just a little bit about the diseases associated with prion proteins. We have Kuru, which was a disease found in a population within New Guinea. And one of the things that they knew about this population is they had death, high levels of death associated with neurologic conditions in women and children as compared to men. Some men did die from the same sort of symptoms, but it was higher in women and children. And so they discovered that when an elderly male dies, It is customary for the females and children to eat part of their brain material in order to gain their knowledge. However, what they were doing really was spreading the disease amongst the women and children. And so that led to the higher mortality rates within those groups, within this tribe or this group of people. And so basically, you stopped cannibalization and the disease went away. There is also something called fatal familial insomnia. And this is where you have the prion proteins, unknown etiology, and you present first with difficulty sleeping, and it progresses to dementia, and eventually you die. And all of these that I'm talking about now are going to be diagnosed post-mortem. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is, again, a fatal prion disease, and it's usually going to be in patients over the age of 60. Again, it takes months. You have disorientation, dementia, paralysis, wasting, etc. And then, of course, the mad cow disease, and this was eating contaminated meat. And so our bovine populations as well as our sheep populations are now screened for the scrapie protein, and you get culling, massive killing of cows or other livestock if they do have those, because they could be passed on to humans. Again, this does not get inactivated or does not get destroyed by normal heating. And so just cooking your meat through is not enough to get rid of this protein.